Another ceasefire unravels in Yemen. As hostilities look set to resume, will the 6-month truce prove the calm before a bigger storm? And with much of the world's attention turned elsewhere, what can help end one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Yemen. Dozens of aid agencies and international bodies had begged Yemen's warring factions to come together and extend a truce that has lasted for 6 months. The NGOs had a solid case. Civilian deaths are down, landmines are being cleared, farmers have gone back to tending their crops, and it was hoped that both the federal government and the Houthi rebels would hammer out another deal.
So here I would urge all sides to exercise restraint, allow the discussions that we have ongoing to bear fruit, and let's ensure that we can take the necessary steps forward, moving Yemen out of the violence that we have seen for the last 7 years.
But the deadline to extend the truce came and went. And to see why, just asked some people on the street who say tales of the ceasefire's benefits are exaggerated.
We, as citizens, did not benefit anything from the truce. The first thing, the airport was not open to places where we often travel, such as India or Cairo. The second thing is that there is still a blockade on food products. The port of Hodeidah is still besieged. We could not even benefit from the truce financially. We still do not have salaries, as they were stopped when the central bank was moved from Sana'a to Aden in 2016.
Now, Yemen has been thrust back into war. Heavy fighting broke out just minutes after the ceasefire ended on Sunday night. The central city of Marib and the Al-Fakher area saw the fiercest fighting. Rebels reportedly threw everything they had at government forces, from tanks to cannonballs. Meanwhile, the government says it has no appetite for more fighting.
We are keen to renew the truce and put all issues on the table for dialogue, despite the end of the period of this truce, and we are still keen to preserve all the gains that have been achieved for the people of Yemen.
But the Houthis have a few grievances as well that they want ironed out before they consider stopping any fighting. The original truce called for the federal government to fund salaries for public workers and open up airports. That reportedly didn't happen, and Houthi leaders said they've been prepared to respond to these transgressions with aggression.
We are ready for all options. If they want peace, we are people of peace. And if they want war, we are people of war. They have tried us for 8 years. We are not asking for special demands. We are asking for rights. The Yemeni people have the right to live a decent life. They cannot plunder the wealth of Yemen. And the Yemeni people are without salaries and in an economic air and sea blockade. We are determined to adhere to our terms and conditions. We will never budge on that.
So with both sides, as usual, blaming the other for failing their people, this war looks set to continue. Here now to discuss what's gone wrong and if there's any hope for reconciliation are, from Sana'a, Hussain Albukhaiti. He is a pro-Houthi journalist. From Tampa, Florida, we have Giorgio Cafiero. He is the founder and CEO of Gulf State Analytics, a geopolitical risk consultancy. Focuses on the Middle East. And in Berlin is Ibrahim Jalal. He's a research fellow at the Yemen Policy Center, specializing in security, conflict, and defense. Thanks all so much for being with us. Ibrahim, I'll start with you because I want to get your take on why this desperately needed ceasefire was not extended.
Thanks for having me. I think the extension of the truce for a third term of 2 months was controversial. It's controversial for me in a sense that's not tied to political process, a broader political process that actually becomes the umbrella under which falls. So its collapse was a question of time rather than anything else. But if we also zoom out into the broader geopolitical landscape and look at the past extension of truces and the timing at which the truce actually came into effect early in April, we see also a parallel, that is the stalled GCPO negotiations and at this point, increasing domestic uprising in Iran. And these, of course, have geopolitical ramifications on Iran and its broader network of paramilitaries. That's the broader view. But if we unpack the positions and conditions of parties, mainly the government of Yemen and the Houthis on the other side, the extension of the truce for another 6 months was a condition to be met actually 2 months ago. But mainly because of the Houthi opposition to that, it didn't happen.
Okay.
And now if you look closer to the issues and the statements that have unfolded, so we had the opening of Sana'a airport and extension of the flight, and these should be extended definitely, pending that national security for other states is respected and honored. Continuation of fuel into Hodeidah port, the opening of Ta'izot, or the lifting of the siege there, and the new component.
Ibrahim, let me go back before you go too far. I mean, let me go back to the first thing you said and ask, why, after so many years, this truce hasn't been tied to a broader process that you refer to.
The Houthis have made clear conditions for them to engage in a comprehensive peace talks. That is related to what they call the lifting of quote unquote and the blockade, as well as meeting some what quote unquote humanitarian conditions, which basically relate to the flow of fuel, flight resumption from Sana'a airport, as well as other de-escalatory measures that are conditions for them to engage.
Okay.
And these have been conditions for the past few years.
Okay, let me get Hussain Albukhaiti's opinion on this, because Hussain, as you know, many in the international community, let's use that term, will point the finger at the Houthis, saying that it is now they who are threatening to bomb Saudi and UAE targets, and that is why the truce has not been renewed. What is your opinion?
I think who is now actually in need of this truce is Saudi Arabia, especially a European country like UK and France and Germany, and as well United States, because they are afraid that if Yemen and Sana'a forces will bomb oil refinery and oil field in Saudi Arabia and as well United Arab Emirates, this means will increase the price of gas and oil, especially after the war in Ukraine. The price has increased, and it has actually devastated the economies in those countries. That's why they are so keen in having this truce to be renewed. But on the other hand, we see that they don't care actually about the Yemeni population. Since Sana'a forces has agreed and renewed this truce for 3 times before, Saudi is still delaying some flight from coming out or to Sana'a. They are delaying and hijacking the fuel ship before it enters Hodeidah, and they leave them for weeks without allowing them to enter the Hodeidah port, even though they have been searched by the United Nations and searched by the Saudi coalition. And this actually increased the cost of the fuel. Since this truce for the last few months was signed, we have gone through 3 fuel crises because Saudi is blocking the ships, and as well the salaries of Yemeni civilians, the public sector. Saudi is still refusing to pay the salaries, even though that all income from natural gas and from fuel and oil export of Yemen is going directly to Saudi banks, and that's why Yemeni here in Sana'a, they have insisted that those salary must be paid according to the list of 2014. This means there is no Houthis who will get paid. They have agreed here in Sana'a to use the public sector list of names that was before Houthi entered Sana'a, but still Saudi Arabia and United Nations and United States, they are refusing to do so. And I don't think that the Houthi actually, they are trying to get any political gain, or they are asking for something that will benefit themselves. It's only for Yemeni civilians.
We know the Houthi position is that salaries must be paid, the blockade must be lifted, but then what? What kind of political solution would then suffice if those conditions are met? Because your opponents say the Houthis have no plan to stop fighting unless they're given absolutely everything, and that fighting is actually their reason for existence. So assume then, hypothetically, that the conditions are met, salaries are paid, blockade is ended. What do the Houthis want?
The Houthis, or here we call them the Sana'a government, they actually want a total liberation of the country from any foreign troops, either Saudi or United Arab Emirates or other troops. There are reports that some of Israelis have present in Aden and as well in area in Mahra and as well in Socotra Island and in Miyun Island in Bab el-Mandab Strait. And this is one of the most strategic strait in the world. And this is actually those conditions they will be met either by peace or either by the use of force. And I can just want to make this sure that here in Sana'a, the Yemeni forces, or as they call them, the Ansarullah, the Houthi, they have now the upper hand. They can in a matter of hours send hundreds of ballistic missiles, hundreds of drone attack, hundreds of missiles to target Saudi ships or any other ships that are actually having this blockade in Yemen, because the main goal of Houthis or of Sana'a is to liberate the entire country.
Okay, right. And that's what the opponents of the Houthis say, that they just want entire control. I mean, Giorgio, where do you view the Houthi demands? And I mean, really, having listened to both sides in this conflict, where is there space for concessions?
Well, as we saw last month, the Houthis were definitely flexing the military muscle. And also, we have seen a significant amount of, at least some degree of some real division within the government side. And I think the Houthis came to the conclusion that they have the upper hand and that they have more to gain from the truce expiring than from a further extension of this truce. At this point, there is a very difficult challenge the international community faces in trying to get the parties back into the truce. I don't think it's impossible. I certainly hope that there can be a return to the truce. But given the dynamics on the ground and given how the Houthis are assessing the situation, my fear is that it could be very difficult for different parties in the international community to convince the Houthis that the right thing to do is to go back to the truce. Of course, the United States.
Right. I mean, what about the chances, though? I mean, when I talk about space for concessions, you know, what about the chances of lifting the blockade entirely on Hodeidah port? We heard Hussein mention Socotra Island. Yes, there is a military base for the UAE there, quite controversially. Would these be kind of easier asks that could at least get the process more sincerely started?
There's a pretty large gap between the demands of both sides. The Houthis, of course, have the position that their demands are entirely reasonable and that these are basic demands and meeting them should be easy. The other side views these demands completely differently, seeing them as maximalist, extremist, so on and so forth. It's going to be very difficult to find sort of a middle ground. But I think it's really in the interest of the millions of people in Yemen that we can go back to a truce. Many people criticized the truce, saying it just simply gave the Houthis an opportunity to regain a lot of strength. It didn't stop all the violence. There were clashes during those 6 months. But there's no denying that from a humanitarian standpoint, those 6 months did a lot to help the people of Yemen. Civilian casualties went down significantly. Humanitarian groups had a much easier time coming into the country. There was a lot more travel in and out of Yemen. And I really think the international community needs to do everything it can to try to bring the parties back into a truce, as difficult as that would be.
Right. Ibrahim, I mean, regardless of who was trying to gain what during the ceasefire, the bottom line is that, as Giorgio was saying, many civilians were able to benefit. I mean, everything from getting food to opening their shops again, driving between different areas, even buildings in Sana'a. I saw some very nice footage. We're starting to see repairs, historic buildings. Now it's stopped again. I mean, how much longer can civilian life actually hold out? How much worse can this get?
I think just to echo what's been said, the benefits of the truce were deeply felt by many Yemenis, but certainly not those in Taiz, where You have major, highways and roads connecting the city with its vicinity, including trade routes, where connectivity to other cities have not been opened. And instead of, for example, from traveling from Al Hawban to Ta'is city via Al Qasr roundabout in 10 minutes, civilians have to take a 6-7 hour travel full of complexity and rather traveling on bumpy roads. So I'm unsure how disproportionate the benefits have been distributed in Yemen. That's one. Second, I genuinely believe that now the truce and the benefits that came hinge on defense, but the possibility of its extension now is mainly on the concessions that the Houthis will make. Because to add new components to the truce without making progress on all components of the previous conditions is already a concession, but on the government end, if we look at it from on a spectrum basis. So I think the point that broke the extension of the truce was the inclusion of non-civil components when it comes to salary payments. These include, interior and defense ministries that were marching, as Giorgio mentioned, and swaggering in multiple cities from Sana'a to Hodeidah and elsewhere, so as to posture for further escalations. So the paradox here is you want your opponent, the government of Yemen and its backers, to pay the bills of those who fight it on the other hand. That's a bit paradoxical and quite controversial. But there were pre-agreements already on the civil servant component, which the government of Yemen made a public announcement that agreed to the last proposal that was sent by UN Special Envoy Hans Grundenberg on August 1st. But because that flexibility came in, then the rational point from a negotiation perspective is to think, how far can I push further? And I think that's where the Houthis were, coupled with developments in Iran, GCPO talks, and the broader landscape with the energy market, as Hussein highlighted earlier.
Hussein, there are sometimes little defense for either side and how they've behaved in this war. There have been atrocities committed by all parties involved. But when you hear Giorgio's point out that really the Houthis just do have more to gain by continuing to fight, by continuing this war, what do you say to that? Do Houthis want to see, or do they feel they have to see Yemenis, civilians suffer more before they can liberate, as you said, all of Yemen? How much longer will they have to suffer?
I mean, if we compare between areas controlled by Ansar al-Houthi and areas controlled by the Saudi-backed forces, we've seen that those so-called in the Saudi coalition, they are fighting each other. United Arab Emirates has been using Al-Qaeda and supporting Al-Qaeda to fight against Ansar al-Houthi in many areas, like in Hodeidah, when they have advanced toward the city. And as well, they have created those camps and those prisons where they have tortured thousands of Yemeni. Al-Qaeda is running freely there. We've seen many suicide attacks, many assassination, many of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Islah, has been becoming kidnapped by United Arab Emirates forces, killed and tortured to death. So, and where our Yemeni are suffering? They are actually suffering under the control of the so-called Saudi-backed forces.
Right,
and here in Sana'a, the Sana'a government, it says, and it wants to ensure all Yemenis that it's the responsibility to liberate all countries.
Ibrahim, I mean, does the West, in a sense, ignore those groups at their own peril? And how much danger are Yemenis in now, just based on the fact that they are now far from the center of the world's attention, no matter how severe the humanitarian crisis is?
I think the West looks at Yemen from a predominantly security perspective, but these groups have not faded from their focus, especially ACAP, who has multiple umbrellas and has been, even in historical terms, instrumentalized and weaponized and used as a cover by multiple groups. But to limit the exploitation of ACAP by one actor or another I think it's important to also look at the body of evidence that have emerged from the UN reports, especially those focusing on terrorist groups, including tactical cooperation between ACAP and the Houthis, which has been also evidenced by the release of ACAP prisoners in multiple prisons in Sana'a without any legal ground, even from a security perspective, which actually throws even more questions on ACAP, its modus operandi, its tactical operations, its strategic landscape, and how many ACAPs do we have in the country? That's just one question. And another that I wanted to circle back into actually the issue of payment of salaries. And I think any authority that wants to claim legitimacy as much as it wants the public to subscribe to its regulations must also give something in return, in which case the most fundamental thing is salaries. In 2019, 2020, for example, also 2021, we saw multiple reports from the UN panel of experts indicating that, for example, the Houthis have generated a shy minimum of $2 billion. And if you look at the bill of salaries and how much do they cost in total, close to 997 billion Yemeni riyal, which is basically
okay. Are you saying then the money is actually there, but not being distributed?
The money is there, but has been invested widely on other things, financing the war effort, countering, building military and security capabilities. And if you take also the other portion from fuel,
I think this is just kind of misinformation that the guest is trying to spread.
Right, Hussain, I'm sure, you absolutely disagree, though. We are down to our last 30 seconds, though. Let me just come back to Giorgio for one final question, because tactically, when do you think we could see another round of productive negotiations, maybe another, at least temporary ceasefire implemented? When?
It's difficult to answer that question. Unfortunately, I'm not terribly optimistic. I hope my pessimism is misplaced. But again, as I said at the beginning of this program, I think the Houthis assess that they can more easily advance their agenda and pursue their interests without a truce.
So the fighting will continue.
Okay. I just hope it doesn't excessively escalate.
Yeah. Giorgio, I'm going to have to give you the final word. Very unfortunately, we're out of time for this edition of The Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for being with us as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter. And do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.